revolving door prohibition to constitutional officers and legislators. The council is already authorized to give guidance on revolving door to state officers and employees. And the bill does the second thing, authorizes the council and local clerks to redact email addresses from disclosure forms. And that's the bill.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions from committee members? All in favor? Aye. Let's record our votes. Bill reports 8-0.
Thank you.
Delegate King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate being able to go. I have two bills. Let me start with 1337 because that deals with ethics, which you just heard. I first have a very small line amendment, which the council could report.
Yes, Madam Chair. On line 26, after the section symbol, strike 2.2-3188.2 and insert 2.2-3118.2.
Madam Chair, it's just a line amendment that transposes the wrong number on the code section.
Move to support the amendment.
Second.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Vote. Yeah. Voice vote, please. All in favor?
Aye.
As opposed?
thank you, Madam Chair. You might remember, some of us who've been here before, back in 2018, the law was changed by us to allow the Speaker of the House to appoint certain members to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority and Northern Virginia Transportation Commission who are non-legislators. Before that, you had to be a sitting member of the House or a local legislator. But we changed that to allow for non-legislators to serve. I think at that time we just didn't think it through, but as you know, legislators like us and others are required to file ethics reports. But if you're a citizen, you don't need to. But obviously on this commission, the work that you're dealing is with public funds and such, and so we want to make sure that the citizen members of this commission, the two commissions, are also required to file the same reports that the legislator members are. So that's really what I believe, we all believe it's just an oversight.
Questions or comments from members of the committee? All those in favor?
Aye.
Please open the vote. Roll. Members, please report. Register the vote on the electronic means. Bill reports. Close the roll. Or close the roll. The bill reports 7-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. And the other bill I have is 404, which is a bill that, at first glance, you might think, what's the point of this? Let me just explain briefly what the origin of this and what I'm hoping to accomplish with this. Section House Bill 404 would amend the existing law in Virginia, in our code, which declares currently that the policy of the Commonwealth, as part of its provision for public education, and to promote establishment and development of public library services throughout its various political subdivisions. In other words, the current law says that it is our state's policy to promote libraries for the purpose of public education. My bill would add to that just another condition that says essential services to the community as part of that. And the reason is, most of us think about the libraries as both an educational as well as a community center. I use it all the time for my office meetings. I go there a lot for different community meetings and such. Nowadays, we're having a lot of young people coming there, not just to learn and read, but just kind of hang out and use a computer. And for many of our vulnerable communities who don't have access to computers, that is really the one place that they have access to free internet access. And so we thought that just declaring it as a public educational institute by itself makes it somewhat limited in its current scope. And the reality is that there are some libraries in our state, and I'm sure other parts of the Commonwealth might have issues as well. But up in Northern Virginia, there are some folks who say that you can access the internet from home anywhere, from school, so do we really still need libraries? And we just wanted to make the point that as a policy of the Commonwealth, we do believe that it's beyond just public education, it's also an essential place where the community can gather. There's absolutely no other implication other than the fact that we want to just declare as a policy the fact that libraries are essential to our state. Now, the only other reason why we chose the words essential service when I drafted this is, it turns out that the federal government, both at the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies, use designate certain institutions within our communities as essential services, meaning that if there's an emergency, a shelter, there are some places that become essential so that people can be sent there for being sheltered and such. And libraries have been declared that at the federal level. The state does not. And so we want to be consistent so that, for example, if our county wanted to use libraries as an emergency shelter, for example, that's something that there would be a question that library would be a place that could be used for that, rather than just being a public education facility. So those are some of the reasons. There may be some folks in the audience who may have some views on this as well, but the goal is really just to ensure that we are declaring as a policy what we believe is already how people understand this institution.
Members, any questions?
Is essential service a term of art that's defined in the state code? Because, you know, we really don't care about the federal government. We're talking about the state code. But if it's in there in the state code as a definition, gotcha. If it's not, then I don't know if anyone's going to know what essential service means.
Madam Chair, and I'd answer the delegate by saying I don't believe so, based on the research I've done in previous years as well. So I think essential services in this context would be the common language that we would all use. There's no legal definition. There's no implication that by using those words you're triggering some other mechanism. And I'll just say this for the record, I've had some concerns from some people saying, does that mean that the government has an obligation to fund it? It does not. There's nothing in our code nor anywhere in practice in law that says just because something is an essential service that means that government must always fund it. Obviously, every time there's a government funding, whether it's at the local level, state level, federal level, that's at the discretion of us. We look at the budget, and if there's budget applications, we would fund it. So I think the word essential service came, as I said, from my conversations with some of my constituents in Northern Virginia, because we're so close to the federal government, and because the Department of Homeland Security in Northern Virginia area have said some of these facilities are essential services for the purpose of sheltering and emergency, that we just wanted to use that language so that as lawmakers and policymakers and stakeholders talk about libraries in that context, we're using similar language.
Calvin, any other questions from the members? Any other comments in support of the bill from the audience? Delegate Martin.
My constituents.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Chair. Sorry, we just ran over. I'm slightly winded. My name is David Berger. I am a constituent of Delegate Keems. I also serve as the president of SEIU Virginia 512. Our members are librarians in Fairfax County who absolutely provide essential services to local families, to children, to parents, to folks who are looking to file their taxes on time, to start businesses, and to make our community a better place. Also, as the dad of 2 young girls, the libraries are essential services. Let me guarantee that they have saved many a Saturday and Sunday where they were tearing up our house. So proud to be here and support this bill.
Thank you. Delegate Murphy.
Can I, Madam Chair, I'd just like to ask the patron, is there a budget amendment that had to be attached to this?
Madam Chair, I've answered my colleague and delegate from McLean that there is no budget amendment. There is no fiscal impact whatsoever because it's just a policy language. All we're saying is right now the current policy states that libraries are for public education purposes. We think that was maybe a narrow reading at some point. Today it's much more than that, and so we just want the current policy to reflect what is actually happening in our Commonwealth. And there's, again, I want to be absolutely transparent and open. There is no budget implications. There's no intent to use this in any way for fiscal purposes. The county did not ask me to draft this. Nobody in local government asked me to draft this. This was a conversation that came from a number of my civic associations and communications. In fact, we were meeting in my library in Oakton when this conversation came up, and so we just thought it'd be a nice way to make sure that our code language reflects the current situation in Virginia.
Any other comments, questions from the committee? Any other comments in support of the bill? Anyone in opposition? Committee moves by motion.
Second.
All those in favor, please register your vote. Clerk will open the roll. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee.
Delegate Guzman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. bill, the amendment will say in line 13, it would change from,
Which bill are you talking about?
oh. House Bill 587.
Just say, the council has a copy.
It's to change in every restroom in line 13 to at least one restroom accessible by each gender.
Yeah, take a moment so that the council can incorporate that. Council,
Madam Chair, and this might need to be reworked a little bit by our editing team, but essentially on line 13, at the end of the line where it says every restroom, strike that language and insert at least one restroom accessible by each gender, 2. So the sentence would read, the director of the department shall develop and implement policies that require at least one restroom accessible by each gender to be designated for public use in any public building on property that is owned, so on and so forth.
motion moving amendment,
So moved.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Delegate response.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We might not be aware that men's bathroom in the state buildings do not have changing tables for babies. It's actually a request of one of my constituents who is a single father who got begged me to introduce this legislation. Because anytime he's with the babies in a state, even in a state facility, he just doesn't have the room appropriate to change his babies, and he has to just be on the floor or try to find a counter in the bathroom. So this bill is asking to put changing tables in state buildings, so at least there is one per gender at each building. The reason of the change is because, unfortunately, the Department of General Services were not able to give us an exact amount of how many buildings, how many bathrooms, but we do know that each bathroom will cost $700, and we have filed the appropriate budget amendment. But for that reason, since we don't want to just be a really high expense, we are asking just for one bathroom per gender. The federal law has already passed in 2016 requiring that tables are added to men's bathrooms in federal buildings, and because of the great lack, some companies are absorbing the cost for private buildings. I believe that it is important that we should at least have one changing table in every bathroom in the state buildings, and the signature will be absorbed by the cost that I mentioned before. We understand the women's role in the workforce, and as they have become the primary providers for families. So the amount of single fathers have raised throughout the years. In the US, the number of single fathers was about 1.96 million in 2012, and they represent 3.4% of stay-at-home parents, or about 2.2 million men. Fathers need to be able to properly take care of their children and change their children. Buildings operated by the state should take this lead and should be especially attentive to taking care of the need of all our citizens in Virginia.
Thank you, Delegate Guzman. Any questions, comments? Delegate Knight?
I'm not going to debate the merits of the bill. I just wanted to bring up, the chairman already knows this, but on the fiscal implications, it says, like you said, they don't have a count of the restrooms that would need to be changed, but it would be approximately $700 per restroom per area. So, as Madam Chairman already knows, I believe if they want to go forward, the proper motion would be to report and refer to a close. That's fiscal impact.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Delegate Knight. Somebody, Delegate Ted, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Delegate Guzman. I was wondering, maybe this is a question for our lawyers, if there would need to be an enactment clause with a further out timeline. Otherwise, if it passed, would all these bathrooms have to be in place by July 1 when the law takes effect?
she would like, so that they have until a certain time to develop those policies. But it's not saying that the bathrooms have to be fixed by July.
That's also an important clarification, thank you. This is a policy issue, so I don't think we need to, put that on at this point. Any other comments questions from members of the committee? How about, in the audience, any folks in the audience to speak in support of this bill? Anyone in opposition? Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I had a question for the patient. I know you said you put in a budget amendment, but I missed how much did you put it in for?
I put it for $100,000.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any moves on motion?
I move we refer this to appropriations.
Report, refer.
Report and refer.
Second.
Clerk will open the roll. Clerk will open the roll. Members will register their vote on the meeting. Clerk will close the roll. The bill is reported out and referred to appropriations. Vote 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Delegate Levine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. HB 183 allows localities to better fund their law libraries. It is entirely permissive. It does not require a locality to do a thing. Under current law, localities can require up to $4 to go from every single civil action filed in courts to go to their law libraries. This bill expands that from $4 to $7. I couldn't figure out how old the $4 was. I know I look back to 1988. It must have been sometime before then. It's been at least 30 years since this number has gone up. If you look at a civil action, most of us know that it's very hard to imagine one that doesn't cost someone, a plaintiff, under $1,000 with lawyers and everything. Most cost several thousand. Actually, most frankly cost in the tens of thousands, often hundreds of thousands of dollars for a civil action. I don't think the extra $3 that a plaintiff would have to pay would barely be noticed in all of their attorney's fees. It wouldn't bar anyone's access to justice in that way. But what the bill would do is allow other people to have access to justice and to legal services. The majority of people who use law libraries are not attorneys. They are people looking to know their legal rights without attorneys. People wanting to know their civil rights, wanting to know their criminal rights. And so it's vital for people to be able to go into a local law library and to find out what their rights are. This bill was brought to me by the city of Alexandria, which I proudly represent. Alexandria Law Libraries had to cut back on its services for lack of funding. There are a number of people here who supported the bill, but again, I reiterate, the bill is permissive. It allows localities to take action to increase this sum from $4 to $7 if they want to fund law libraries.
Thank you, Delegate Levine. Questions, comments from the committee members? Anyone in favor of, sorry, please say that. Maybe.
A request to speak?
Yes.
Madam Chair, permission to ask.
Delegate Nianis.
Thank you. So when I just Google free legal research sites, there's over 10 pages of Google pages. There's free legal research sites provided on the George Mason School of Law. There's lawyerist.com. There's casetext.com. There's agilelaw.com. There's CaseMaker X. There's Google Scholar. The entire United States Code is also online. The Code of Federal Regulations is online. I guess my question is, we just talked about public law libraries. In an age where so much content is online, is this necessary?
Madam Chair, Delegate Nianis, I would answer that it may be very easy for lawyers to go online and know what they're looking for, but when you're a non-lawyer, you get something really special that comes to the law library. You get a librarian. You get someone who knows the law, knows how to help you, can help you find what you're looking for. You don't get that online, and a lot of people do not have the sophistication, and some people don't even have the internet, frankly, and they can look in the books and find them out online. Remember, people who are well off can afford lawyers. They're not going to these law libraries. We're talking about people who know the least about the law and have the least chance to understand the law and to pay for a lawyer. And again, we're talking about $3 per case, and again, it's permissive, not required. And there are other people here who could address that as well.
Yours for a follow-up question?
Yes.
It's two-part. You would acknowledge that a law librarian would be violating Rader's ethical codes because law librarians, that's the unauthorized practice law, if they were to give legal advice. Number two, does this not increase the cost of access to the court system for our private citizens too, by raising this fee?
Madam Chair, Dr. Miaris, I would say that you can, without violating the practice of law, you can certainly answer a question like, where can I find the law on murder or on something much less, on landlord-tenant? And the librarian can say, do you have any books on landlord-tenant? And the librarian might say, yeah, we have a very nice little treatise or guide manual to landlord-tenant. In fact, I'd love if some of my librarians would come up and answer exactly what they provide. But also in terms of access to justice, $3 in your several thousand, tens of thousands of dollars law case is not something people notice, but I would argue that not being able to find out your legal rights is something people notice. And I do have a number of people in support of the bill that I think would like to talk.
No further questions.
Anyone else? Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My aunt used to be she's a retired law librarian, Superior Court in DC, but I want to ask you a quick question. I guess your witnesses will probably speak to this and make one comment that you kind of didn't make clear. This is up to 7.
Yes.
So it could be 5. You could make it $1 or $2 or $3. So
20 cents or $6.95.
So, yeah, so it's permissive and everything else. So it's pretty flexible and it's not a lot of money. But so are we getting a lot of traffic in Alexandria Law Library?
Madam Chair, Dr. Krizek, I'd like to let Alexandria Law Library answer that question.
Anyone else? Any comment? Right, and if there are a number of things that are repetitious, if you could just say, repeat what the previous speaker had to say.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm Sarah Taylor. I'm the Legislative Director for the City of Alexandria. This was a request bill from the city. We have, in fact, seen a significant increase in traffic in our law library. Fiscal year 19 law library visitors increased by almost 15%. At the same time, the amount of money coming in through the current fee on civil filings has decreased precipitously over the last few years because more civil filings go to mediation, they go to arbitration, other ways. They're not getting filed, and so we're not getting that funding. And I think another point that really needs to be made is that law libraries are not just about big rooms full of books and LexisNexis and Westlaw. In our community, our law library provides a significant number of community education programming, everything from the ABCs of expungement to programs on how to become a citizen, programs on landlord-tenant law. We also have joined with our sheriff's office and our juvenile detention center to create a book club for inmates. This is not just about this perception of a big room with dusty old law books and access to Westlaw that some boutique lawyer doesn't want to pay for. This really is about expertise and community programming and access to justice for folks in our community who might not have access to it otherwise. And so again, local option, no more than $7. It is something that we would very much like to avail ourselves of so that we can expand our law library hours, continue our programming. We've implemented a number of austerity measures in order to do with what we have. And our city is committed to keeping the law library available, but we would love to be able to expand our hours and expand our programming, and we appreciate your support. We appreciate Delegate Ling for continuing to support this legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Murphy.
I have a question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. What do you do when someone comes in and can't afford the $4?
Just to be clear, the $4 is not the cost of entering the library.
No, I know that.
This is someone filing a lawsuit. So we already have a filing fees. Filing fees could be $70, could be $100. If you hire an attorney, you're talking several $1,000s. People can get pro bono, informa pauperis relief from all filing fees in the court. If you can't afford to file it, you can go to the judge and you can say, I can't afford the filing fee, and they can determine your assets, and that would be true for anyone, for any filing fee. It doesn't happen that often, but it certainly could happen on those law firms.
Next.
Michelle Gallagher at the Virginia Municipal League. We support the bill for all the reasons that Sarah Taylor and
Thank you.
Doug gave.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Phil Abraham, representative Virginia Library Association. We support this bill, and as Delegate Levine mentioned, this fee, which is a local option, has been raised for over 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anyone else speak in support?
I have a question. Where does the $7 come from?
It's civil actions filed in that locality. It's a part of the filing fee. People who file lawsuits. Pay.
Anyone else with questions or comments? Motion to report, second. Clerk will open the roll. Please register your vote on electronic medium. Clerk will close the roll. The bill report 7 to 1.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee.
The other delegates will vote.
Afternoon, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this is House Bill 510. There is an amendment which we need to take now, or if it works for you, I can explain what we're doing and take that at the end.
Go ahead. That's
Okay,
good.
thank you. So this bill is a recommendation of the FOIA Council. It's actually one of 2 bills that I introduced this year to deal with the issue of some problematic gift agreements that were discovered at George Mason University a couple years ago. Gift agreements were discovered after some pressure and insistence from a couple transparency groups. And as it turns out, George Mason actually discovered a couple of gift agreements that, according to President Cabrera, he was quoting, fall short of the standards of academic independence I expect any gift to meet. First of all, I want to say I'm really proud of George Mason University. This kind of prompted them to take a look at their gift agreement terms and policies, and so they've made some pretty significant changes, and so I think that's great. The incident also, though, I think gave us a chance to look at our own FOIA policies and to go ahead and shed some light on whether those needed to be tightened or not. And so last year, I introduced a bigger bill to deal with the subject. That was passed on to the FOIA Council. The FOIA Council endorsed a part of it. They kind of punted on the second part. They said it didn't really have much to do with FOIA. It had more to do with the relationship between foundations and universities. So you are lucky that is going to higher education and not you. But this part right here is actually the recommendation of the FOIA Council, and I believe there's peace in the valley when we talk about that small little technical amendment. So there's 2 issues that House Bill 510 addresses. So the first one deals with when donor information can be FOIA'd in the first place. So the code does already protect sensitive information. So things like personal fundraising strategies and tax planning, and so that all makes good sense. This doesn't touch any of that kind of stuff. But the way that the current code is written, it actually gives the university the ability to prevent from disclosure even things like the amount, the date, and the purpose and the terms of the pledge. And so if you look at the wording, that's because it says nothing shall be construed to prevent the disclosure, which actually provides that power to the university to decide whether or not they want to disclose that information. And so the first change on here just makes it really clear that those subject items are subject to FOIA, and if somebody wants to FOIA those items, that they have a right to be able to do that. I suspect that was the original intent. This just goes ahead and tightens that up. The second part, and I think this is kind of the more meaningful part, deals with when a person can remain anonymous. And so God bless anonymous donors. A lot of them make really big contributions to our colleges and universities, and I think that's fantastic. It's a wonderful, selfless gesture. However, I don't think that somebody should be able to remain anonymous if their gift comes with terms and conditions that actually affect the academic decision-making process. And so if you think about it this way, I don't think any of us would ever think it was acceptable if I made a big anonymous donation to the Department of Environmental Quality that had terms and conditions for how they were going to be making permitting decisions, and that I could remain anonymous and nobody would ever be able to find out. So that's something that if it be applied to other state institutions, that it should apply to our state colleges and universities as well. And so what the amendment really does is just say that you have an agreement that deals with academic decision making. That is something that can't be anonymous. The amendment that is proposed I consider to be very friendly. It replaces related to academic decision making and replaces that with a more precise term, directs academic decision making. And so we're putting that in kind of the active and the affirmative. And so with that amendment, my understanding is we have peace in the valley of all of our colleges and universities. Happy to take any questions.
Move the amendment. Second. Second. All in favor? Any questions? Anybody in the audience to speak in favor of the bill? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sarah Dariso, and I just graduated from George Mason in December, and I have been a member of Transparent GMU for 3 years. And all of us students in Transparent GMU took a lot of time out of our academic career to fight for transparency at Mason due to these problematic donor agreements. And I'm also a student coordinator with Partners for College Affordability and Public Trust. And Transparent GMU and Partners for College Affordability and Public Trust support this legislation. Any donation that affects academic decision-making, such as hiring or firing professors, curriculum taught in classrooms, or research at public universities, should not be made anonymous. We should have this bill passed so all donors are transparent. And I wanted to thank the delegate for introducing this bill and Freedom of Information Act Council for endorsing this legislation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Glenn Vessa. I'm a volunteer with the Legislative Committee for the Sierra Club Virginia chapter. The Sierra Club and myself personally avail ourselves of FOIA very often, and although this pertains to an issue that relates to the Koch family, which has been a strong advocate against climate change, I think this is good policy just generally. We need to know whether it's the Koch brothers or the Soros or whoever it might be who is making conditions on a grant. And for that reason, I hope that you'll pass this out of committee and support it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Stacy Gordon with Partners for College Affordability and Public Trust, and we support transparency in higher education and therefore support this bill.
Thank you.
Brian Turner with the Virginia Conference of the American Association of University Professors, and we support the bill for the reasons expressed previously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Megan Ryan with Coalition for Open Government, and we worked with the delegate during the FOIA Council study session. And we very much appreciate the intent of the bill and hope you'll vote for it.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in support of the bill? Anyone in opposition? Committee moves by motion.
Second.
Clerk will open the roll. Clerk will close the roll. The bill is reported 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the subcommittee.
Delegate Reed, thank you for your patience.
Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, this is House Bill 722 is a partial FOIA exemption for affordable housing applications. And so just to kind of give you an overview of this would be a temporary exemption that would apply only while the applications are being reviewed by the local governments. This would be before the submission to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development or the Virginia Housing Development Authority. And the intent behind this is that currently these applications are subject to FOIA disclosure during the actual application and review process, which makes it possible for one applicant to actually gain information on another applicant's application, and therefore it could actually kind of taint the competition of the process. So again, the intent here is just for a temporary FOIA exemption for the period when the application is being reviewed by the government, by the local government. Once the HUD or VHD deadlines have passed, the grant loan applications would then become subject to FOIA disclosure to the exact same extent that they are now. And this is one of those ways where it's like we want to be able to address the critical shortages in affordable housing, and therefore we want to be sure that we maintain kind of a competitive atmosphere in that and the sanctity of that competitive process.
Delegate, any questions, comments, members of the committee? Any comments in support of the bill in our audience? Anyone?
I'll move to the board. Madam Chair, Roger Wiley, representing Loudoun County, which made this bill a part of their legislative program this year.
Thank you. Anyone speak in opposition? We've had a motion and a second to support the bill. Clerk will open the roll. Members will report their vote. Clerk will close. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members.
Delegate Paditis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here to present HB 313. This is about a FOIA exemption also for libraries. It protects the privacy of library records of patrons who have accessed online material or resources from a library under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. Current law limits this protection to borrowed materials. So the very simple language added says that material or resources borrowed or accessed. So it just extends the protections of patrons of library.
Any questions, comments from members of the committee? Anyone in the audience to speak in favor of this bill?
Madam Chairman, this bill also is part of Loudoun County's legislative package for this year and was brought to the county's attention by the local public librarians in Loudoun because they had had some inquiries where this appeared it might be a problem.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, Phil Abraham on behalf of the Virginia Library Association. We work with Loudoun County and also with the FOIA Council staff on this legislation. I think it's a good bill. Thank you.
Any other comments in support of the bill? Any other comments in opposition? Clerk will open the roll. Members will record the vote in electronic medium. Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Delegate Long.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and just thank you to the members of the committee. This is for HB 1392, establishing a FOIA ombudsman in the Office of the Attorney General, so hopefully third time's the charm on this one. Madam Chair and members of the committee, come before you to present this bill that basically will create a Freedom of Information Act ombudsman to be housed in the Office of the Attorney General, and I'll explain why we would be putting that person in the AG's office as opposed to a FOIA Advisory Council and the rest. So state agencies have a tremendous workload responding to FOIA requests, and we have found through legislative research and outreach that few state agencies have a FOIA officer solely dedicated to handling FOIA requests or resolving FOIA disputes. The FOIA ombudsman would be a dedicated, independent, and neutral position to streamline the FOIA request process. The ombudsman's duties will ease the burden of state agencies and the average FOIA requester by providing a knowledgeable, independent resource that can mediate FOIA requests to improve the efficiency of the Freedom of Information Act. Currently, there is no framework for mediation beyond a FOIA requester and a custodian spelled out in current statute. This bill establishes the formal authority for mediation. Unlike the FOIA Advisory Council, the ombudsman would be a formal mediator with the power to mediate disputes between the FOIA requesters and custodians. According to the Division of Legislative Services, placing the ombudsman in the FOIA Advisory Council would raise conflicts with overreach into the judicial branch in regard to issuing opinions to improve FOIA, and with the executive branch
with the ability to promote compliance. The Division of Legislative Services recommended that the executive branch is the most appropriate place for the FOIA ombudsman due to being able to fulfill the day-to-day duties of responding to and mediating FOIA requests. The FOIA Advisory Council, as a legislative body, is inherently unable to fulfill the day-to-day tasks of the ombudsman throughout the year because of its part-time, because of the fact that we are a part-time legislature and the council's quarterly meeting schedule. Establishing a FOIA ombudsman in the OAG will help everyday citizens and state agencies navigate the often complex and confusing world of FOIA and public information. I hope we'll be the will of the committee to report the bill.
Comments, questions from members of the committee? Anyone in the audience speak in favor of the bill?
Good afternoon. I'm Brittany Whitley with the Office of the Attorney General, and Attorney General Mark Herring does support the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the subcommittee, Mark Hickman on behalf of the Virginia Press Association. We strongly support efforts to protect and strengthen FOIA, and we thank the delegate for bringing this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Megan Ryan with the Coalition for Open Government. I rise to embrace the idea of an ombudsman's office. We have generally supported the idea of strengthening the FOIA Council, but I did want to just give the committee a little bit of background. When the FOIA Council was created in 1999, and Roger Wiley was a member of that study committee, there was a lot of discussion about where to place the FOIA Council. Do we put it in the AG's office? Do we put it somewhere else? Some states do it in the Secretary of State's office. There was discussion about putting it in the Attorney General's office, and I just want to read this passage, which comes from the final report that committee issued after the long 2-year study on what to do with FOIA and whether or not to create this FOIA Council. It said, although 4 of the 10 state Sunshine Office models reviewed were affiliated with that state's Attorney General's office, this model was not favored by the Joint Subcommittee because of the perception of conflict of interest. In Virginia, the Office of the Attorney General is responsible for the representation of state agencies, but may be required, if tasked with a Sunshine Office role, to rule against those same state agencies as it relates to Freedom of Information Act disputes. It was made clear that the issues weighing against placement of a Sunshine Office in the Office of the Attorney General were of a structural nature and not an operational one. So that has been the history of why the FOIA Council is in the Division of Legislative Services and why there has been some reluctance to create any other kinds of offices within the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak on the bill?
Madam Chair, I believe we're joined by Alan Garrett from the FOIA Advisory Council. Is Alan here today? Alan, if you could speak to basically what it is that the FOIA Advisory Council does and why, we've discussed, basically the idea of why an ombudsman can't go into the Advisory Council.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Alan Gernhardt, Executive Director of the FOIA Council, obviously with DLS as well. The FOIA Council currently is an advisory and educational agency. I happen to have just done our annual report. We did 1,821 informal opinions this year, which we issue to local and state government, to citizens, and to news media. So we talk to anybody and everybody. We're not limited. My understanding this ombudsman office would be specifically for state agencies. So there's one difference there. Our opinions are not binding. They are advisory only, and we do try to help everybody. We don't have any official mediating powers. We do try to help on an informal basis to resolve disputes when people have problems. Sometimes we do a phone call back and forth, a courtesy call here and there. We publish educational materials. We do training seminars. We did 56 of those this year. But our role really is educational and advisory, whereas this office would have formal mediation powers. That's what I see as the big difference.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor of the legislation? Anyone opposed? Question?
Yes, ma'am. I see in here where it says that the Attorney General shall hire, and I heard where the Attorney General really wants this, and I see where there's a fiscal impact of $304,000. So I assume the Attorney General didn't have any problem taking that out of his budget.
You'll notice, Madam Chair and to Delegate Knight, that I've included a budget amendment for this bill.
Didn't answer my question. What I said was, I assume that the Attorney General doesn't mind taking it out of his budget. Is that true or false?
Madam Chair, I would tell the delegate in this that if we had the ability within OAG to basically have that $304,000 that we could simply transfer over there for the creation of this, then I'm sure he would simply be happy to do so. But at the same time, given the restraints that we've put on in this legislation, because the legislation is prescriptive in terms of what the mediator is supposed to do, what their qualifications are, that having a budget amendment is different from just expanding staff and basically making sure that the Attorney General could just basically instruct them on here's what you shall do. Because this is legislatively prescriptive, we can't just shift money from the Attorney General's office in order to create that. This is why I requested a budget amendment.
I'll take that as a no.
Sure.
So if this is reported, we would need to refer it up to appropriations.
Yes, Madam Chair.
All right, any other comments? Committee moves by motion?
Move to report and refer.
Second. Clerk will open the roll. Clerk will close the roll. The bill is reported out and referred to appropriations, vote 6-2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the members of the committee.
Delegate Delaney.
Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm here today to present HB 548. This bill amends the Virginia Freedom of Information Act to add an exclusion for records of active investigation being conducted by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. The issue is that under the current version of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services is obligated to comply with a FOIA request even if an investigation is still open and of a sensitive nature. DBHDS covers several investigations every week regarding complaints, allegations of abuse and neglect, deaths, seclusions, and restraints, and compliance with the rules and regulations for licensing providers. The purpose of these investigations is to ensure that providers are properly providing services and adequate care to individuals. A lot of this information that is collected is incredibly sensitive and affects the lives of marginalized individuals. Over the past several months, there have been many high-profile incidents prompting investigations by the Office of Licensing. Before the office has had a chance to complete the investigation, DBHDS receives requests from both media or constituents seeking documents related to an ongoing investigation. Since DBHDS does not have a FOIA exemption for active investigations, the agency has very limited options for withholding the documents until the investigation is complete, despite that releasing these documents may impede the investigation. This lack of FOIA exemption also makes police reluctant to give DBHDS information. All told, the lack of FOIA exemption for the department is making it increasingly difficult for these folks to do their jobs of protecting this most vulnerable population that they serve. So the solution that I'm presenting with this bill is providing the department a FOIA exemption for ongoing investigations to prevent those being investigated from finding out the information that's been provided by witnesses in an early stage, align with the HIPAA regulation, and will prevent sensitive information from being released to the media and the public before the facts are known.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions from the committee members? Do we have anyone to speak in the audience in favor of this legislation? Anyone to speak in opposition? Second? Clerk will open the roll. Members will record their vote in electronic media. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports out 8-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members.
Delegate Weber?
Chair. I have two bills, HB 1527 and HB 1528. They're kind of tied together in that I'm not sure if everybody follows the news, but I represent a county that had some big issues in regards to their economic development and the funds that were essentially taxpayer funds that were stolen and misused. And so in an effort to try and provide more transparency to government and help along that process, we introduced these two bills in regards to the EDA, the executive director of the EDA, and their board members. And essentially what they would do is similar to what we do in that they would get training on conflicts of interest, as well as would then also be required to fill out a statement of economic interest, so that that transparency can then be out in the public and people can see where that those conflicts of interest are.
Thank you. Questions from committee members? Anyone in the audience to speak in favor of the delegate Rubin's bill?
Mark Hickman on behalf of the Virginia Press Association. It's always good for public officials to get FOIA training, which is part of the bill, and we support it and thank the delegate. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak in support? Anyone in opposition to delegate Rubin's bill? Clerk will open the roll. Record the vote. Electronic begin. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports 8-0.
House Bill 1528 is the filling out of the statement of economic interest.
Clerk will open the roll. Record the votes. Clerk will close the roll. Clerk will close the roll. Bill reports out 8-0.
Thank you.
2-0. All right, next we have Delegate McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 446. This allows tech for troops to receive excess computer equipment from the government. Rather than throw it away, why don't we help out our veterans? I have Lakeisha and Mark here to speak on that.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Delegate McGuire. I'm Mark Castor. I'm the Executive Director of Tech for Troops. We've helped over 750 veterans in the Commonwealth of Virginia in the last 4 years. What we do is we're bringing homeless and impoverished veterans, bring them off the streets, literally, and we give them basic computer literacy training. And that goes from plugging it in, how to put power in the computer, how to turn it on, how to get online, what's the cloud, what's basic cyber security, and basic computer literacy from a Word document. So we use Google Docs, but how do you create a resume? And that's what we do. That's our mission, and that's what we do. We're also starting an upper level IT training program starting in April. Active duty transitioning out of staying in Virginia. We'll be training in our facility in the next couple of months, and we're going to teach A+ and Security Plus cybersecurity training. And then as well, we're partnering with the Virginia Defense Force to help promote and protect the 2020 elections. We are using our training facility to allow VDF to come in, do some training, so their gentlemen and women can go out, cybersecurity actors go out and support the Commonwealth to localities and cities as well. Thank you. Keisha.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairperson and fellow delegates. My name is Lakeisha Lowe. I am an employee at Tech for Troops. I'm a veteran as well. I absolutely love the program and what it's about. I am not only going to school right now for a Security Plus certification, but I'm also getting the hands-on training that I wouldn't have had anywhere else. So once I am able to go out into the field, IT field, and show that I have hands-on training because of Tech for Troops, it's a leg up for me. So I fully support this bill, and it's just a wonderful program. So any donations we get benefits veterans as myself and other veterans out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate McGuire, now can you Can you tell me exactly which veterans this would apply to?
I would imagine any veterans in Virginia, whether it be National Guard, military folks, or Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines in Virginia.
That are residing here in Virginia.
Correct.
Yes, Delegate Adams?
Madam Chair. Delegate McGuire, I'm just speaking to the language of this bill. It says in consideration of the organization's promise to refurbish the donated equipment, and having worked in state government and working with procurement, typically there's an MOU or something. So in lieu of that, for an organization's promise, what happens when if the organization were to break its promise?
And in what way do you mean by that?
Well, it doesn't specify just your organization, which sounds amazing. It's any organization that's a 501c3, and the state government and the Department of General Services, that's run by state government, is going to provide through donation equipment in consideration of the organization's promise to refurbish and donate. So I'm asking.
So we triage computers, right? We have to. So we get in Windows 95 machines. I'm not going to take that and give it out to a vet. I'm going to get in Vista machines, and I almost guarantee you the state has computers that are sitting in the warehouse that are Vista machines. I can't give those to vets. So we would take the older computers, we would recycle them, and we've recycled 350 tons, keeping them at the landfill for us, and then take the newer ones, refurbish them, and give them to in-need veterans here in the Commonwealth.
Madam Chair.
Delegate Adams.
So again, this is not speaking to your organization, but rather the language of the proposed bill, in which the language simply refers to the 501c's promise, and without any more formal agreement. I don't understand what that means.
I would be willing to enter a formal agreement with the Commonwealth if need be. I mean, I can promise, but we're going to get computers that are broken. And when you get a refurbish them, you got to take from one computer to do the next. I mean, I'm sure you understand that.
I think I have an answer.
Right.
I think this may be language that was given to us by Legislative Services. I could be wrong on that. But if that's the case, I'd be open to a friendly amendment to maybe change that. Does that make sense to you guys?
Councilor, we have an opinion on that. Oh, Delegate Lethbridge, you're on court. So
Well, it's a donation, but the statute says that in consideration of the promise, and so whenever you have consideration, you basically have a contract, and if they violate that contract, they can be sued for not reversion. So I think there is some enforcement mechanism for contractual revenues.
So that exists in the legislation.
I think that the language of the statute will allow redress if the organization fails to refurbish like they're supposed to. The statute says they must do it on the condition of, in consideration of, and in any contract there's an offer to its consideration. That forms a contract. If you breach a contract, you get sued.
Thank you. That was my question. I appreciate that.
Delegate Friend.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate McGuire, a question. If you could clarify, I think the language in the bill on line 61 is that this would be given to members of the United States military, but I think in an earlier Q&A with the chair, you said this would be given to veterans from the different branches. Can you verify what your intent is, and if you would suggest amending the bill to reflect your earlier testimony?
I would definitely reflect or ask to have that amended, veterans. So we're actually serving both active duty transitioning out. I don't know if you know, but the suicide rate for active duty transitioning out is going up. The suicide rate among veterans is 27 now, which is unacceptable in my book. And I think to most folks that support the military. But you're right, instead of just military, it could say active duty and veterans. I would love that.
You know, I'm in the nonprofit field, and so I'm sensitive to the difficulty of doing this kind of thing. And it sounds like a great program, but I am a little bit concerned. Earlier you talked about Virginia veterans. This would allow 501c3. I know you wouldn't be the one, but any 501c3 to take these computers and refurbish them and distribute it free of charge anywhere in the United States. Any member of you right now is right for the United States military. it would probably be better. I don't know how we could keep that in Virginia.
Friendly amendment, Virginia veterans.
Absolutely.
Delegate Tran?
You know, I really appreciate the work you do. I worked on veterans employment issues in a previous life. I think one of my concerns, though, is I want to make sure that if this bill passes, that all organizations who are eligible, you know, who do this type of work are eligible, and that we're not creating in code a almost sole source donation mechanism for one organization. It kind of sounds a little bit like that by,
you know, so that's one concern I'd like to raise.
Delegate Murphy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that we should give the gentleman a little more time to work on this and maybe pacify for the day.
Second.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to offer a line amendment on line 59. I'll start reading. It says, for donation to members of the, I'll say, to members of the National Guard and the United States military located in Virginia. I'd like to put that on line 58, 59, and repeat it down on line 61 also. I think that this is where we need to get.
59 and what's the other line?
The very next section, it says on line 61.
Got it.
Counselor Haddad?
Second.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair.
Yeah, Counselor.
One clarifying question, Madam Chair, if I may. Delegate Knight, I believe you said members of the National Guard, and can you repeat the rest of your?
And then I'll go, and United States military located in Virginia.
Is this for active duty and veterans?
I think it just says, did you just say veterans?
Well, I would say
Okay.
transition out of the military.
Right.
So I believe that line amendment on line 58, after at the end of that line, insert National Guard and then on line 59, at the end of that first sentence where it ends in military, insert residing in the Commonwealth.
Yes.
And then the same amendments on line 61. So charge to members of the National Guard and United States military residing in the Commonwealth. Is that correct?
Madam Chair.
Delegate Adam?
I just wanted to be clear and make sure that I understood that the patron is okay with this, because this is essentially what I asked him about prior, the almost near exact substitute. So I want to make sure that he is comfortable with this substitute now.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I believe there's been a motion. Second.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I just have one. Earlier, the witness mentioned that you would not, you know, we've got this contractual provision in here that you're making a promise to refurbish, and maybe I'm being nitpicky here, but is a promise to refurbish donated equipment, does that include the situation that you mentioned earlier, which would be some of these are not going to be able to be refurbished, you're going to actually have to recycle, and I don't want to say we promise to refurbish where possible or something like that almost, or is it kind of a, is it known, is it in the terminology of refurbishing, is that accepted practice that if you refurbish something, some of it will have to be recycled out? Is that what you said? Okay, I retract that. Okay, it's okay. We can, I'm all right. We can just leave it. No, we can leave it out. Okay.
Delegate Tran?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just get clarification? Can I get clarification on the amendment? I just want to make sure we had veterans in there, and I wasn't sure if I heard that, because members of the National Guard and military service members, to me, implies active duty and not veterans. And we had talked about veterans in the testimony from Talia McGuire.
The intention is for this bill to apply to active duty and veterans of the United States military. Then we can say on line 58 at the end, to members of the National Guard and active duty
veterans transitioning out, maybe.
Active duty transitioning to veteran status.
Veteran is defined in code, as is active military, naval, or air service members. So if you would like to build on those two definitions that are already in code, we can add that terminology in to dictate that it is both active duty military members and veterans of the United States military. And the National Guard.
Okay.
We'll have to work that, and we can have that prepared for full committee on Thursday, but conceptually.
Any other comments from any members?
We need to vote on the amendment.
Let's vote on the amendments. Second, right. All in favor? Voice vote. Right, motion for is amended. Clerk will open the roll. Members will record the vote on the 5 medium. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports 8-0 as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair, helping us get it better. Appreciate it.
Bill Hurst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's your prerogative. No, we're good. Okay. I was going to try and help out Delegate Carol Foy, but and defer, but I'm more than happy to come and present House Bill 630 before you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. There is an amendment that Brooks Braun diligently put together this afternoon, and so I'm hoping that council may be able to report an amendment in the nature of a substitute, Brooks, or just an amendment? Just an amendment.
You want to report the amendment?
House Bill 630. Madam Chair, on line 29, after lobbyist, insert semicolon, credentialed press. On line 30, after the word every, insert Romanet 1. And on line 30, after 2.2-422, insert or Romanet 2, person who registers with and is placed on the list of credentialed press maintained by the clerk of the House of Delegates.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking to the amendment. As the entire bill seeks to address.
Move the amendment. Second.
Second.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So we do everything right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the amendment seeks to incorporate additional paid employees, personnel who are frequently in and around the Capitol and the General Assembly building, the Pocahontas building, to try and build on the Sexual Harassment Training Act that we passed in 2018, to also include members of the press that are, I think, definitely a contingent of individuals that are frequently around clerk staff, DLS staff, members of the General Assembly and their staff, so to try and make sure that they would also be incorporated into the Sexual Harassment Training Act. And so, if I may, Madam Chair, speaking to the bill as amended now, we all now are having to go through sexual harassment training as members of the General Assembly and our staffs. I think that's a wonderful thing to try and change what I certainly have heard by anecdote and have unfortunately witnessed in person, a culture in this workplace, which the Capitol and the General Assembly are technically a workplace, that sometimes enables or otherwise promotes inappropriate behavior. And so that was the impetus for wanting to pass the 2018 Sexual Harassment Training Act. As I was thinking about ways in which we could improve that act to ensure that more men and women feel safe and feel that they aren't going to be subject to sexual harassment, that we would also include other individuals who
do business frequently here in the Capitol and in the General Assembly building. And so we wanted to incorporate as a condition of registration requirements for lobbyists that they shall not be registered fully until they have a certificate of course completion, similar to what we in the General Assembly have to go through, and now also adding members of the press. So really succinctly, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, what is good for members of the General Assembly, what is good for a staff of the General Assembly, we also would like to extend to registered lobbyists and credentialed press.
Thank you. Any questions from members of
I see exactly what you're doing. I see you have a delayed enactment clause in there. Explain that why.
Yes, Madam Chair, Delegate Knight. So working with trying to implement this in a way that times out with normal registrations and re-registrations. We wanted it to be May, couldn't make it May of 2020 without there being an emergency clause, so that's why there is the delayed enactment to be May of 2021.
Anyone else? Delegate Fran.
Delegate Hurst, could you clarify if you think this would be the exact same training we take as members, and if so, therefore, wouldn't be no additional cost?
Madam Chair, Delegate Tran, we have talked with the appropriate folks for both the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office and at least the House Clerk's office do not anticipate a fiscal impact for this bill. And it's my understanding that in actually promulgating the portal itself and the informational video, that it would be specific to registered lobbyists and credentialed press, whereas ours has stuff that is unique for members of the Assembly and their staff. But generally, we want to make sure that if something improper occurs here during our workplace, that people know what is permissible, what is not permissible, and then to whom they should actually report any impropriety with this workplace specifically.
Thank you. Any other questions? Members of the committee? In the audience, anyone to speak in support of this bill? You want to stand up? Speak with us.
I'm Julie Basco, Eagle English Communications. I'd like to ask who would be teaching this?
Madam Chair, this would be a training module where the information and the requirements would be similar to what is already set forth in the Sexual Harassment Training Act, which is Title 30, 129. It would be up to the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office to actually put in that information and develop the module.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Those in support? Anyone in opposition? Committee moves by motion.
Second.
Clerk will open the roll. Committee members will report their vote on the electronic medium. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports out 7 to 1.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee.
And that's with the amendment.
With it.
Anyone else? Carol, I have votes. Jason?
My understanding is that.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Administrative action, House Bill H09 and House Bill 609 and House Bill 671 have been referred to court. So that's Delegate Harris and Delegate Mullins. I'm going to step down and present my bill. Give me exercise.
Thank you, Delegate Carr. You have bill number 544.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. There's a substitute bill that makes it identical to Senator Ruff's SB 563 as it was intended.
Can you explain that substitute?
I think it's a difference. I think it's a word something from award contracting in Virginia through the posting
Excuse
of...
me, Doug, or we have to adopt the substitute first. Shall we adopt the substitute?
Yes, I'm going to adopt the substitute.
Second.
Voice vote, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Again, this is...
Yeah, yeah, you can.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Again, this is a substitute bill that makes it identical to Senator Ruff's SB 563. House Bill 544 brings greater transparency to state government contracting in Virginia through the posting of awarded contracts to the Commonwealth's e-procurement system. That's e-. Posting of awarded contracts will be required for any agency that is already required to post notices, RFPs, and IFDs to EVA. It will be optional for any other public body that uses or may wish to use EVA, including local government and local school systems. Currently, all documents related to an RFP or IFD are available for agencies that are required to use EVA. Yet, once the required notice of award or notice of an intent to award is posted, no further information related to the procurement is posted, such as the awarded contract or modifications that are later made to the contract. This means an awarded contract is available through a FOIA request made to the applicable agency. Since this is public information, it is logical that they be made available in the same manner as other procurement documents. It will save citizens, businesses, and state employees time and effort otherwise spent in making and fulfilling FOIA requests for these documents. The enactment clause sets a date of July 1, 2021 to provide ample time for DGS to prepare for this without the need of additional staff, and the postings are to be respectively given current obligations. Mike Thomas from McGuire, I believe, is here, and he's available to speak in more detail on the legislation if there are questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Delegate Tran?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Perhaps this might be a question for our lawyers. When I was with the federal government and managed federal contracts, sometimes the contract that we awarded in the bid and the proposal, and then in the subsequent contract that was signed, there would be details that were considered intellectual property based on the strategy laid out in the contract, perhaps, and other things. And if we post those contracts to the public, and I understand the need for transparency and support that, but if you post a contract in whole that it contains intellectual property, it might then be an advantage that competitors would have in future bid opportunities. So how do we address that currently in FOIA, and how would that be addressed under this bill?
Thank you. I'm going to allow Mr. to speak to that.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'm Mike Thomas. I represent CGI Technologies. CGI is the Commonwealth's partner in building, maintaining EVA. I want to thank Delegate Carr for patroning this. Their current process laid out for that, and again, part of the reason for the delayed enactment, which was at the request of DGS, is so that the instructions will be clear. But even now, a standard part of the process where trade secrets or other intellectual property that can properly be kept secret, where those have to go in contracts or even go into proposals that are made. For example, the offerors are requested to provide 2 copies, one that's redacted, that has those, and one that's not. And so often you'll see contracts, and when I requested contracts through FOIA from an agency, there'll be portions of them that are redacted for that reason. Typically, they don't put those kinds of things in the contract itself. And so the bill doesn't change what's available publicly. It just requires them to be posted online.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Does any member of the public wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Thank you, Dr. Carr. Madam Chair, Andrew Lamar on behalf of the Richmond Technology Council. Our members who do a lot of
work for the various state agencies and IT procurement. Strongly support the bill and thank the delegate for bringing it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Megan Ryan with the Coalition for Open Government. We support the legislation as well. It's good for not just businesses to be able to prepare future bids, but it's good for citizens who are trying to keep track of contracts and services.
Thanks very much.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon. Troy Murphy with the Northern Virginia Technology Council. We echo the previous comments and strongly support this bill as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I was going to ask, does any member of the audience want to speak against the bill? Okay, hearing nothing, do I do a motion?
Second.
Thank you. The bill is reported. Call for the vote. Yeah, vote. Call for a vote. Okay. Vote is closed. This report's 8-0. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that Carol Floyd, I think we'll pass, Carol Floyd has a bill today, and that's going to be passed fast if she's not here. In courts or something?
She's in labor and commerce.
Oh, so they're in house. All right, so that, adjourn. Motion to adjourn? We'll have our next meeting next week at this time. Thank the committee members for their diligence and being here and all the